Good evening, dear reader, and welcome back to Sleepless Tales. We're narrating Demian still. It's been quite a long time since I narrated the last part of this, so it may take a minute to get back into it. But anyways, don't forget to like, comment, favorite, and subscribe. And know that I'm very glad to have you here this morning. Or evening. It's morning for me. Anyways, let's continue on. Starting on page 64. Or the break in chapter 4. There's 3. Where am I? No, God. Many a time, I attempted to imitate him, and fix my will on something with such concentration that I was certain to achieve it. They were wishes which seemed urgent enough to me, but nothing happened. It didn't work. I could not bring myself to mention the matter to Demian. I should have found it impossible to confess my wishes to him, nor did he ask me. Meantime, cracks had begun to appear in my religious faith, and yet my way of thought, which was very much dominated by Demian's influence, was very different from that of my fellow pupils, who boasted a complete unbelief. For there were some boys among us, they would say, for example, that it was ridiculous and unworthy of men to believe in a God, and that stories like that of the Trinity and the virgin birth were absurdities, and that it was a scandal that such stuff was being hawked round in our times. But I did not share those views. Even where my doubts lay, I knew enough from my childhood experience about the reality of pious life, such as my parents led, and that it was neither unworthy nor hypocritical. Furthermore, I felt then, as ever, the deepest awe before the truly religious. But Demian had accustomed me to considering and explaining the stories and articles of faith to myself in a less hidebound and more personal and imaginative way. At any rate, I gladly and willingly accepted the interpretations he urged on me. A good deal of it, such as the Cain episode, was indeed more than I could take. And on one occasion, during the confirmation classes, he frightened me with an idea which was, if possible, even more startling. The teacher had been speaking of Golgotha. The Bible account of the passion and death of the Savior had made a deep impression on me from my earliest days. Very often, as a small boy, round about the time of Good Friday, after my father had read the story of the Passion to us, deeply moved and caught up, I had myself inhabited this sorrowful yet beautiful and pale, ghostly, monstrously living world of Gesterman and Mount Golgotha. And when I heard Bach's Matthew's Passion, the mournful, glowing power of the suffering of that hidden world had sent mystic shudders through me. Even today, I find in this music, and in the Acoustus Tragicus, the epitome of all poetry and artistic expression. At the end of the lesson, in question, Demian said to me thoughtfully, "This story has something about it that I don't like, Sinclair. Read it through. Pass your tongue over it. There's an insipid element in it. In this business of the 2 thieves. Wonderful how the 3 crosses stand next to each other on that mount. But then, why this tract-like story about the honest thief? First, he was a criminal that had committed evil deeds. God knows what. And now, he melts and takes part in tearful scenes of sorrow and repentance. What sense is there, I ask you, in such repentance, when he is only 2 steps away from the grave? It's nothing but one of your pious moral tales, sugary and unconvincing, helped down with the grease of sentimentality and an edifying background. If you had to choose one of the 2 thieves today for a friend, or consider which of the 2 you would prefer to trust, it certainly wouldn't be the sniveling convert. No, it's the other man. He's a man of real character. He despises a conversation which, for a man in his position, can only be a pretty speech, and pursues his own way to the end. He does not forswear the devil, who must have aided and abetted him at the 11th hour. He has character, and there are only too few people of character in the Bible. Perhaps he was a descendant of Cain's. Don't you agree? I was dumbfounded. I thought I was thoroughly familiar with the accepted story of the crucifixion, and I now saw for the first time how little personal imagination I had brought to my hearing and reading of it. Yet, Demian's new conception of it had for me a fatal ring. It threatened to overthrow the solid beliefs in me to which I felt I must cling. No, One could not turn everything upside down in that way, least of all the holiest of holies. As usual, Demian noticed my opposition at once, but before I could say anything, he interrupted in a resigned voice. I know it's an old story, as long as you don't take the thing seriously, but there's something I would like to tell you. We are here dealing with one of the places where one is very conscious of the weakness of this religion. The point is that this God of both the Old and New Testaments is a wonderful figure, but not what he purports to represent. He is all that is good, noble. He is the fatherly and the beautiful and the most high. Sentimental, it's all right, but the world consists also of other things, which are merely ascribed to the devil, and that half section of the world is suppressed. It's never even mentioned. It is the same as the way they celebrate God as the father of all life, but the whole of sex life, which is the basis of life itself, they are silent about, or indeed, whenever possible, describe it as sinful and the work of the devil. I have no objection to people honoring this God Jehovah, and far from it, but I consider that we should sanctify and honor everything, the whole world, not merely this artificially separated official half. Therefore, alongside the divine service should be a devil's service. That, in my view, would be right and proper. Otherwise, you must create a God for yourself, who embraces the devil in himself, and before whom you don't have to drop your eyes in shame when the most natural things in the world take place. Contrary to his normal way, he had become almost violent, but immediately afterwards he smiled again, and did not worry me further. His words, however, went straight to my adolescent heart. What Demian had said about God and the devil, but the godly official and the suppressed devil's world fitted in with my own ideas on the subject. My own myth, the conception I had of two worlds, or two different halves of the world, the light and the dark. The realization that my problem was a problem of all humanity, a problem of all life and philosophy, suddenly swept over me like a holy shadow, and I was overcome with fear and awe when I saw how deeply my own personal life was caught up in the eternal stream of great ideas. This realization was not a joyful one, although, to some extent, gratifying and corroborative. I found it hard and unpalatable because it contained a note of responsibility, of self-reliance, something beyond childish ideas. It implied standing alone. For the first time in my life, this deep secret was revealed to me, and I told my friend about my idea of two different worlds, which I had held since childhood. He saw immediately that I was entirely in sympathy with him, and believed him to be right, but it was not his way to exploit this knowledge. He listened to me more attentively than ever, and looked into my eyes until I had to avert mine. For in his gaze, I saw once again the strange look, the animal-like timelessness that had no age. "We'll talk about it another time," he said, forbearingly. "I see that you have thoughts you are unable to express. If that is so, you must know that you too have not lived so far according to your own conception of life, and that is not a good thing. Only the ideas that we really live have any value. You have known that your permitted world was only half of the world, and you have tried to subjugate the second half after the manner of the priests and teachers. It will not be to your benefit. It benefits no one once he has begun to think." I was profoundly moved. "But," I almost shouted, "there are genuinely foul and forbidden things. You can't deny that. They are forbidden, and we must renounce them. I know that there is murder and all manner of vice, but merely because it exists, am I to go and become a criminal?" "We won't continue this discussion today," said Demian, trying to appease. "Thou shalt certainly not kill, nor rape and kill girls. But you haven't yet reached the stage where you can understand what permitted and forbidden really means. You've only tracked down part of the truth. The rest is still to come. You can be quite sure of that. You have now had an urge in you for about a year that is stronger than anything else and is considered forbidden. The Greeks and many other races, on the other hand, elevated this impulse into a godhead and honored it at their great religious festivals. What is forbidden is not permanently so. It can change. Even today, any man can sleep with a woman once he has been to the priest with her and got married. With other races, it is different, even nowadays. Therefore, each one of us must discover for himself what is permitted and what is forbidden, as far as he himself is concerned. It is possible never to do a forbidden thing and yet be a real villain. And conversely, fundamentally, it is merely a question of complacency. Whoever is too complacent to think for himself and be his own judge manages to accommodate himself to the shalt nots as they exist at the present time. It is easy for him, but there are others who are conscious of the commandments in themselves. Things are forbidden to them, which every man does every day of his life, and other things are permitted to them, which are otherwise prohibited. Every man must stand alone. Demian suddenly seemed to regret having said so much, and he fell silent. I could already grasp to some extent, intuitively, what his reactions were. Although he was in the habit of expressing his ideas in an agreeable and apparently perfunctory manner, he could not tolerate talking for the sake of talking, as he once told me. He was aware of my genuine interest, but he felt that I treated clever conversation too much as a kind of game. In short, without due seriousness. As I read the last word, seriousness, which I've just written, another scene, the most striking I had ever experienced with Max Demian in those still half-childish days, leaps back to my mind. The day of our confirmation approached, and the last lessons of the preparation by the pastor had to do with the Last Supper. It was a matter of great importance to the pastor, who went to considerable pains to explain it. Something of a sanctified mood certainly pervaded the atmosphere during those lessons, but it was precisely during those last periods of preparation that my thoughts were tied up elsewhere, and, moreover, with the person of my friend. While I looked forward to the confirmation, which was described to us as our solemn acceptance into the community of the church, the thought rose urgently within me that the value of the last 6 months of religious preparation did not rest in what we had learned, but in Demian's proximity and influence. It was not into the church that I was ready to be received, but into something of an entirely different nature, an order of thought and personality which I felt must exist somewhere on earth, and whose representative or apostle was Demian, my friend. I endeavored to suppress this thought. I was anxious to submit to the solemn ceremonial of the confirmation service with a certain dignity, whatever happened, and this did not seem to fit at all with my new idea. Yet, do what I would, the thought was present, and it gradually became linked in my mind with the approaching church ceremony. I was ready to comprehend it differently from the others. For me, it was to signify my acceptance into a world of thought, as I had learned to experience it in Demian. It was in those days that I once more engaged in a vigorous argument with him. It was just before an instruction class. Demian was reserved by nature and found no pleasure in my talk, which must have been both pompous and precautious. "We talk too much," he said, with unwonted seriousness. "Clever talk is no value whatsoever. One merely gets further and further away from oneself, and that is a crime. One should be able to crawl right onto oneself, like a tortoise." Immediately afterwards, we entered the schoolroom. The lesson began. I was careful to attend, and Demian did not try to distract me. After a while, I began to be conscious of an odd feeling from the side where he sat next to me. A chill or void, almost as if the place had somehow become unexpectedly empty. The feeling became oppressive, and I turned round. My friend sat there upright, with his shoulders braced back as usual, but he looked different, and a kind of aura that was unfamiliar to me surrounded him. At first, I thought his eyes were closed, but I saw that, in fact, they were open. But they were not focused on anything. It was an unseeing gaze, dead and turned inwards, or staring into the far distance. There he sat, completely motionless. He did not even seem to be breathing. His lips might have been carved out of wood or stone. His face was pale, uniformly pale, like stone, and his brown hair was the most living thing about him. His hands lay on his desk in front of him, lifeless and still, like objects, pieces of stone or fruit, and pale and motionless, yet not limp. They were like good firm pods that had formed round a robust hidden life. A shudder ran through me. He's dead, I thought. I almost said it aloud, but I knew this was not so. My eyes were fixed on that pale stone mask, spellbound, and I felt that here was the real Demian. What he had been before, when he had gone round and chatted with me, was only half of him. A person who, for a time, was playing a part, adapting himself to it, joining in the game to oblige me. The real Demian, however, looked like this: stone, age-old, animal-like, stone-like, handsome, cold, dead, and yet with an alarming secret life within. And round him hung this aura of quiet emptiness, this ether and celestial space, this lonely death. Now, he's retreated completely within, I thought with a shudder. Never had I felt so lonely. I had no part in him. He was beyond my reach, farther away from me, if he had been on the remotest islands in the world. I could hardly grasp the fact that I was the only one who noticed it. I felt that they must all be looking, all shuddering, but no one paid any attention to him. He sat there like a graven image, as stiff as an idol, and I cannot forget how, when a fly alighted on his forehead and crawled over his nose and lips, not a muscle in his face twitched. Where had he withdrawn? What was he thinking? What was he feeling? Was he in heaven? Or in hell? It was an impossible question. When I saw him breathing and alive again, at the end of the lesson, and his glance met mine, he looked no different from before. Where had he returned from, and where had he been? He appeared tired, and the color had come back to his face. His hands moved again, but his brown hair looked somehow dull and lifeless. The following days, I gave myself up to a new exercise in my bedroom. I sat rigid on a chair, stared into space, held myself completely motionless, and waited to see how long I could hold out and what I should experience. But I only succeeded in becoming tired, and my eyelids began to prick. Shortly afterwards came the confirmation service, of which I can recollect nothing of importance. Everything was transformed. My childhood tumbled about me in ruins. My parents regarded me with a certain embarrassment. My sisters had almost become strangers. A sense of disillusionment vitiated and blunted my normal feelings and pleasures. The garden had lost its fragrance, the forest its magic. The world stood round me like a clearance sale of old rubbish, insipid and with all its charm gone. Books were so much paper. Music was a noise. That is the way the leaves fall round an autumn tree. It is unaware of it. Rain runs down it. It is subjected to sun or frost, and life slowly retreats. It does not die. It waits. It had been decided that I should go to another school after the holidays and leave home for the first time. Sometimes my mother approached me with particular tenderness, taking leave of me, as if it were in advance, trying to inspire my heart with feelings of love and nostalgic memory. Demian had gone away. I was left alone. And guys, that is the end of chapter 3 of Demian. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll be continuing on with chapter 4 in the next part. We're approaching on halfway through this book, so you're making excellent progress, dear reader. Yeah. Thank you for joining me in this reading, and I'll see you in the next part. Have a great night.